Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jenelle Riley. I'm an associate features editor at Variety. So thrilled to be here with the most acclaimed film of the year, 12 Years a Slave. And at this time, please join me in welcoming first the actress who, believe it or not, this is her film debut in the role in the role of Patsy. Please welcome Lupita Nyong'o. I know no one wants to sit down because joining us is an actor you probably recognize. I mean, roles as varied as Serenity to Dirty Pretty Things, simply stunning as Solomon Northup. Please welcome Chiwetel Ejiofor. I know for a fact that is not an uncommon response to this film and to you guys. Ever since this movie premiered at the Toronto Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award, it's just been, people have just been rhapsodic about it. Have you been surprised by the response, or just overwhelmed, or just pleased?
I think all of those things. We opened the film the first time in Telluride, which has now got to be a few months ago, and from that moment we were just, we were so, excited and thrilled by the response to the film and what people were saying about it and how they were feeling about it. And obviously, you go into something like this with the hope of that it has an impact, and you try to commit, obviously, to the story and to telling the story, and it is so extraordinary and rare when the film kind of sort of finally comes back and it has all of those qualities that you hoped and more, and that's something that a director like Steve McQueen can really produce.
This is a SAG audience, and so I'm curious, how did you guys get your SAG card?
Is that a complicated question?
No, I can answer it. 12 Years a Slave was my first SAG job, and then I did non-stop after, and I got my SAG card.
So, yeah.
I can't remember.
He doesn't have a SAG card.
It's a long time ago. I was first here when I was 19 to do Amistad, so I'm sure it was. Thank you. So I'm sure it's in the context of that. I think.
Lupita, you've acted professionally before. You did a TV series, did you not? But this is your first film.
Yes, this is my first feature and my first my first film in America as well. Yep.
Sorry. The script is by John Ridley, who did an amazing job adapting Solomon Northup's memoir. How did the script find its way to you, and what were your first impressions when you read it?
Well, for me, I was just about to graduate from Yale, and my manager got the script for one of her other clients, Garret, who is also in the film and plays Armsby. And she saw the role of Patsy and thought I'd be good for it. And it was just at the time when we were finally allowed to audition for professional gigs. So I put myself on tape in New York. It was actually the first thing I put myself on tape for, which is crazy to think about now.
This is how it always turns out.
Yeah, and then the next week we were going to LA for the Yale LA showcase, and my manager invited Francine Maisler's office to come and watch my work. The next day they invited me in to audition with her, and she put me through one hell of a grueling audition. And then 2 weeks later I was in Louisiana meeting and working with Steve on an audition with him. So 3 auditions in 3 different states.
Wow. Now, you mentioned you were at Yale at the time. You're not allowed to audition until a certain point?
Yeah, while you're at school, you can only audition for professional gigs during the summer holidays. But while you're in school, you can't audition because they really want to, keep you to themselves so they can do what you went there to do. So it was just at the time when we were about to graduate, and that's when we were allowed to audition.
So if the script had come to you sooner, would you not have auditioned?
I couldn't have. I couldn't have. If this was happening at any earlier time, I probably couldn't have done it.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I got a call from Steve. I was actually in Los Angeles, and I got a call from him that he wanted to send me the script. So he did. I'd known Steve for a few years since he'd done Hunger, and we'd met and had coffee in Amsterdam, and had talked about different projects that maybe to do something together, which hadn't panned out. And so he sent me the script. I read it, and I was blown away by it. I was sort of like amazed that I didn't know the story of Solomon Northup. I just thought that's, when I first read the script, I kind of assumed that they'd done a massive rewrite from the autobiography, because I felt like if this had followed the autobiography, then I would have known of the autobiography. It would have been like a completely, hugely famous text. You know what I mean? It just seemed, and then I would to discover it was very, obviously it's trimmed down, but it hits exactly the beats of the book, and it's Solomon's story, and so that was the crazy thing that I didn't know about it. Also, I was like it was not an immediate kind of yes, it wasn't. It took a little while. It took a period of time just to kind of reflect on it. It just wasn't the sort of story that I felt was like, you can read a script sometimes and you can immediately see yourself within the whole thing, and then you're like, yeah, this wasn't like that. And then also, in the kind of out of the context of it, I'd never read a story like this before. I'd never read a story that was inside this experience, inside the slave experience in this way. I'd never seen that on film. I'd never seen that represented, really. In cinema, definitely not. You could argue for Roots, but I was born in the Roots year, the year Roots came out, so certainly not for decades. And so I was like, I just felt the responsibility of that, the weight of that, the significance of it. It's almost, it's almost something that you didn't know you were missing until somebody pointed it out, and suddenly it just hits you like a rock that there's always been this kind of blank place for this, and for stories that are inside this experience, told by people who went through it. It seems obvious, and so so then you have that moment of self-doubt where you're questioning whether you're the person to do that, whether you're the person to bring that out and to tell that story, and you wonder about that, wonder if you can do it, whether you're good enough to do it, whether you're connected enough to do it. And so it took a moment, and I went back to the book and to Solomon's biography, and in the end, it really became a question of finding him and understanding that I didn't have to worry about the history of slavery throughout, as a global enterprise. I didn't have to worry about all the other aspects and the important and significant emotional and political aspects of a film like this. What I had to worry about was Solomon Northup and trying to find him and trying to tell his story as well as and as accurately as I could. And he had an extraordinary template for that, which was this beautiful book that he wrote. And so over the course of that weekend, I was able to reread the book and just try to find my own kind of quiet connections with him. And then I spoke to Steve and said that, obviously, I'd love to try.
So we're clear, he offered you the part on the spot, pretty much.
That was what the call was about.
Yeah. How nice is that?
It was great, but it adds its own pressure as well,
Really?
I was never somebody who hated auditioning, because it always put me in the first point of contact with a role and understanding my relationship to it, and a sense of already knowing the kind of the voice, the physicality, some of the aspects of the role that are going to be significant, as well as a dialogue with the director that isn't just a kind of sit-down dialogue. That adds another pressure if you're discovering all those things on the first day of shooting. How somebody's going to do something, how somebody has actually interpreted it. You know, I mean, it's fine, but it's you know, it's not something that I hated.
So for both of you, once you had the parts or said yes to the part, what sort of research did you put into the characters? Did you read the book as well?
Oh yes, I did. I read the book, I think between my second and third audition, I read the book. And then once I had the role, I really read the book. And yeah, having both the text and the autobiography was really useful because I could scour it for clues as to who this woman was. And for me, in my process, it's not so much finding the answers, but finding the right questions to ask. And that's what I went about, trying to find the right questions to ask about Patsy, and then hoping to find answers along the way. And I also went to the Blacks in Wax Museum in Baltimore, because a friend of mine recommended it. That was very early on, and just to get like a three-dimensional experience, I like that, you know, I like wax museums. And indeed, I went there, and it gives you an overview of African-American history, really. And the first thing that met my eye was 500 pounds of cotton, which is what Patsy picked. And I'm 5'5", and this thing was taller than me, and it was wider than me, it was thicker than me. So I was just met with Patsy's loftiness right there. And that was so useful to know what 500 pounds of cotton looked like, among a lot of other things that I learned at that museum. And then it's about, you know, finding the specifics of the character. I read other accounts of slavery as well, and finding her physicality and her speech, her you know, her cadence, and things that I could identify as her and not me, you know, to help me just navigate those two things. Yeah.
I'm not going to try and quote it because I don't want to get it wrong, but there is a description of her in the book.
Yes, Solomon Northup describes her as having an air of loftiness that neither labor nor lash could rid her of. And that was something that really stood out to me in the book, and a quality that I wanted to hopefully portray, you know, that despite all the darkness in this woman's life, she has a light that just cannot be put out. And I truly believe that she led me to find the Cornhusk dolls, because that came from a daydream in my hotel room about a week before we started shooting. I was just thinking about what would Patsy do in her little free time, because I like to know more of my character than is on script, you know, just to have, you know, a three-dimensional understanding of a person. And I knew that Master Epps grew corn on his plantation, so I was like, oh, what if she made crafts from her corn husk? And I looked it up, and it was historically accurate. And there was something always very childlike to me about Patsy, or a childlike quality that I wanted to come through, because she was robbed of her childhood when her master takes a sexual interest in her early. And so I thought, ooh, it would be nice if she made cornhusk dolls for the children on the plantation. And it was just something that I was going to know. It was going to be my little secret. And then the next day I had a meeting with Steve, and he was just asking me about what I was thinking, and I offered it to him, and he loved the idea, so he got the art department to supply me with cornhusk, and I went to work learning how to make them.
Wow. And you can put that on special skills under your resume now.
It's there.
And you mentioned reading the book. Was there additional research you put in as well?
Well, for me, it was about getting down to Louisiana. You know, I was shooting in Nigeria, so as soon as we finished, I was able to, you know, I spent the last day in Calabar, strangely, in the southeast of Nigeria, at the Slavery Museum there, you know, and looking at these roll calls of just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, you know, taken out, a lot of them heading to America. So, you know, some to South America and some to the West Indies, but a lot of people going out to exactly that, you know, exactly the place that I was in. So that I got to Louisiana and then onto the plantations, and the first thing was trying to find the other, you know, there's plantations and then they have like sort of museum attachments to the plantations and so on. So you can start to get a bit of an overview of the sort of wider history. You know, I'd known a lot about the transatlantic slave trade, if you like, and the financial implications of that in terms of just growing up in Europe. You know, it's like your research comes from when you're born, really, because it's the first, when you start to encounter all these things. And growing up in London, the West Indian slave trade, obviously my heritage is Nigerian, so that was very connected to that. And so so a lot of that I really had a lot of understanding of. But Louisiana was something that I'd never been to Louisiana before, so I was fascinated by these plantations and by the kind of the ghosts on these plantations and by the stories on the plantations and the different stories, not just Solomon's story, but the different stories, and even the people there who are running the plantations now and their own family history is so interesting and so detailed and agonizing. So getting to know them, getting to know that area was a really big part of the beginning of it. You know, obviously the book was very important, and then there's the details of it. You know, the details of getting out, the differences between. This is the thing I didn't know, and you kind of understand a little bit in the book, but it's not really until you're out there that you understand the differences between cutting timber and cutting sugarcane and picking cotton, and the different plantations that those three activities are going to create, and how those activities create different scopes of reality, different universes. This is one of the reasons why all those plantations are so different. And so getting out there and understanding those things, and then the specifics of something like learning to play the violin, you know, and having somebody who was a wonderful person who came in to do that and help me with that. So we could spend some of the evenings, you know, just learning how to play the violin and trying to time it so that the schedule would allow, because what I didn't realize when I first read the script was how it's notorious. It's very difficult to play the violin, actually. It's one of those, turns out, you know, like, trumpet, saxophone, guitar, you know, you can kind of think, oh, I'll get there, you know, but the violin with the coordination, and you can very quickly look like you're not playing the violin. So that took a bit of time just to start to get that right, and so there were a lot of different, you know, I suppose that's a kind of outside-in thing, you know, there were a lot of different elements to it, and that was one of the richest things about the book for me, was that I felt that I had learned so much through somebody telling a very simple story about themselves, and yet it cuts through a kind of three-dimensional cross-section of an entire society and an entire psychology, an entire person. So that was the rewarding thing about approaching the filming, first day of filming, I guess.
Can you say what the shoot schedule was, and did you have much rehearsal time?
Well, it was 35 days to shoot, and we had, I think, you know, we were all there early. You know, I got there, like I say, after this other film, and then I thought, and I was convinced that I was the first person there, you know, and then but the line producer was there because there was some of the pre-production stuff was being set up, and I was saying to Anthony Katagas, over drinks, I just said, listen, I think it's going to be a great idea if we get some of the other actors here, you know. And he was like who? I was like, Michael, you know. He was like, Michael's here. It's like, Lupita's here. Like, all right. So we had we had a little bit of time then, because everybody was in so early, that just to get like a bit of like rehearsal time with me. Even Steve wasn't there at that point. Then he came back in, and he'd been there for some pre-production, then he was away, then he came back in, and so we could all start to rehearse. So we had a few sessions at Michael's place. He'd found an apartment.
I had one session with each of them. I had one session with Michael that lasted probably 12 minutes, and
Really?
one session with Chiwetel that lasted probably 14.
Wow.
Wow.
What?
I remember because it was my first film. I remember everything very clearly.
Was it actually going over scenes, or?
Yeah, it was. You know, the thing about Patsy is that you see more of her than you hear. So we rehearsed her big scenes, you know, the scenes in which she speaks. And the thing about Steve is he doesn't want to belabor it in the rehearsal. He wants it to get it there on the day, you know. So, and that was new to me. I mean, I come from a theatrical background, and I'm used to like 4 or 5 weeks of rehearsal. So I had to develop my own rehearsal schedule to try and like catch up to these pros. And then yeah, on the day I was shocked. I was shell-shocked when my first rehearsal was with Michael, and we read through the scene a few times, And Steve would give me some notes, and we ran through the scene again, and he said, okay, right, we're ready. And Michael turned to me and said, you are my peer. And I was like, oh, phew. You know, and Steve said, thank you for being born. I'll never forget those two things, because, like, you know, it was the thing I needed to hear, because I mean, obviously I was really intimidated to be in this situation with these veterans. And then I rehearsed with Chiwetel, and that was more on our feet. That rehearsal was on our feet a little more, but it was very brief. It was very brief.
Speaking of Michael Fassbender, who's just, I mean, he's always amazing, but he is so stunning in this film, and he's your primary scene partner for a lot of the film, and he is playing someone so vile. Would you check in with each other after the scenes? I mean, there had to be an astounding level of trust there to film these scenes together.
Well, I think Michael is, you know, he's such an interesting guy, and you know, I first met him with Steve actually after we were cast, but I'd met him years before in South Africa, but that was very briefly, and so we were at the BIFRA Awards. He was getting an award for Shame, and Steve was there, and I was there, and he said, and I was just very curious to meet him for the first time and just see what the energy was going to be like, knowing what we were going to have to, where we were going to have to go to. And so Steve said, so this is Chiwetel, this is Michael. And Michael looked at me and was like, we're going to have fun. You know. And that's his kind of psychology, right? He was going to bring absolutely everything to the role. There was not going to be any, you know, there was not going to be any room for anything else. Yeah. You know, it was going to be 100%. And I remember leaving that day and thinking, this is going to be an incredible time, and that he's an incredible actor to work with. And it was so satisfying to work with somebody who you know, just always, I mean, everybody was doing it, you know, everybody was working at a certain pitch, but Michael, you know, always just brings 100% to the job, and it's like completely involved in any given moment, and it's, you know, I think he's superb.
Yeah, I mean, I had watched him in Hunger and Shame and X-Men. And I was, like I said, I was very intimidated to meet him. I actually met him on my third audition when I met Steve. I went to dinner and with Steve and some of his art world cronies and stuff, and Michael was the last person to join us, and I was like, oh, there goes Michael Fassbender. Okay, he's joining us, great. And we had a chance after dinner to just talk, and it was great because he's such a personable person, you know? He's so easy to talk to, and we just talked about how we got into this crazy world of acting, and it was just so great to make that connection. And then, so by the time I was on set with him and in that first rehearsal, and he turned to me and said, you are my peer, first of all, I knew that I could trust him. That was never a question, but I knew that he trusted me, which was really important. And that we needed each other in order to be able to do those horrible things together. And we formed a ritual that we never talked about, but when we got on set to do the hardest scenes, we'd have a moment before we started, and we'd share a look and maybe a squeeze of the hand, and then we'd go in, and then we'd button it with a big hug, and because we so badly needed to take care of each other, you know, to go to those dark places. And then once that was done, we went and we had a blast together. I mean, we all had so much fun. I mean, we went dancing together, and they went paintballing, and so
he's a terror on the paintballing as well.
And pool, he's so good at pool. It's so, oh goodness. He's like a race car with a pool at the pool table. Anyway, and so we had a lot of fun together, and I guess we all just recognized that, you know, we had a job to do, and we did it 100%, and then we left it there, and we went and just enjoyed ourselves and our freedom, you know, because when you're working on this thing, it makes you really, really, this kind of material, you really value your freedom, and you recognize that it's thanks to these people that I could be there making this film. Yeah.
When you're playing a real person, Is it easier in a way because you have, research to draw on, or is it difficult because do you feel an added responsibility to the memory of someone who, actually existed?
Well, both those things are true. It's easier, you have the material, you can look at the material, you have direct access to somebody's psychology, what they were thinking at any given point. You don't want to be too heavily reliant on it at a certain point, because that can also just veer you away from the script. The tricky thing is always trying to get the balance right between being very truthful to the book in terms of character, but not really making sense of the script somehow anymore, because you're bringing in elements from a book that aren't necessarily in this, and so on. So you've just got to be prepared to figure that out a little bit. But yes, the added dimension is the responsibility of what is happening, the responsibility to Solomon Northup, the responsibility to his descendants, the sense of that. I mean, I then met, when we were in New York, we met his descendants, and it was a big deal for me, because I felt that was, in a way, the whole thing is about family, and his whole psychology is about family and love. And so meeting this kind of, all the, we met a few of them, but then if you see pictures of all of them, all of the descendants of Solomon Northup, who are all these different races as well, who just represent, all of America, really. And it's really powerful to see how one man's journey ends up in that way, and what he really is struggling to get back to,
And we don't know what happened to Patsy, do we? There's no record.
No.
Yeah.
So it's that, without Solomon, we'd have never known Patsy, but thank God for Solomon, because in Patsy lives on the stories of so many others that are lost.
Yeah. What ended up being the most difficult part of making the film? Either something logistical, or if there was a particular scene that was the hardest for you?
Well, for me, there was a scene that surprised me. And so the scene where Patsy gets whipped, obviously, it was a very hard scene. But after that is the attending to her whips, her wounds. And I just kind of overlooked that scene, because the other scene was the thing that I was most concerned about. So the day before we shot all that, I had to get into makeup, because Patsy has wounds from before she's whipped, from previous whippings. And I was in the makeup chair for about 4 hours doing those wounds and for that day's work. So at the end of the day, I looked at the call sheet for the next day, and it was 6 hours in the makeup chair to do the pre-whipping scenes, pre-whipping wounds, and then the fresh wounds. And I said to the makeup artist, Kala Devi, I said, listen, let me just sleep in these, these wounds, and then tomorrow we'll cut our work in half. You'll just do the fresh wounds, and we'll be good. And of course, she loved that idea. She was like, great. So I went home, and I tried to sleep with these fake wounds on my back, but they haunted me, because I was so uncomfortable. I couldn't sleep on my back, which is how I usually sleep, because I didn't want to mess them up. So I was just haunted by the presence of these things on my back, and I had nightmares, and I was an insomniac for the whole shoot anyway, but that night I slept even less. And I remember I started weeping, and then because I was so uncomfortable. And then in my weeping, in that state, I recognized that my discomfort was temporary, and hers was permanent, She had no choice. It still brings tears to my eyes. And that really quietened my soul for the next day's work. And when we were shooting that scene, and her wounds were being attended to, it just broke my heart.
Yeah.
That's all.
What was the question?
I know. I'm like,
Were there hard scenes to shoot?
Hesitate to follow that. Yeah.
For me, somehow, it was that when people talk about it in terms of the whole journey was trying to make a connection with Solomon. For me, that was the biggest part of the whole time. And so anything that allowed me to see deeper and closer into his situation was what I was looking for, was powerful for me and important. And So in scenes where somebody could ostensibly look at the film and be like, was that a hard scene for Chiwetel to shoot? Say, was probably not very hard for me to shoot, because if it looked hard, what it was doing was it was getting me closer to just having a fraction of the feeling of what Solomon may have gone through at any given point. And that was the journey for me. So it wasn't hard for me to shoot that. It was a privilege to shoot that, you know.
And what I really want to ask is, what's up next? Where can we see you? I hope you guys do a rom-com next. Is that
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
Everyone came armed with tissues, I think. Yeah.
What's next?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm really, in a sense, not. I haven't been able to. I've been reading some scripts, but I haven't been able to get my head out of this experience and out of what this is right now, in order to have the space and time to really figure out, you know, other things. And so, I'm just going to take my time with that. Actually, I think. I did a play last year in London immediately after shooting this, or a little bit after shooting this, and that was really helpful to kind of just, you know, balance those things. But you know, yeah, it'll just take its own time, I think.
Just going to point out they're starting a Kinky Boots tour. So if you have
I can always jump back in. Although I lost those boots at a party, but that's a long story.
And obviously, I have to imagine this film has changed not only your life, but your career. Have you been receiving new offers? Where can we see you next?
Well, I did Nonstop with Liam Neeson and Julianne Moore, that guy right there. And that comes out in February.
Fantastic.
So that's where you'll see me next. And other than that, I did that 2-3 months after 12 Years a Slave, and that was good. It was a good antidote to 12 Years a Slave. Other than that, I don't know yet what's next. And yes, my life is changing on a daily basis, and I'm just taking it step by step. I'm definitely glad that I'm not working on anything right now, so I can really take in this moment and adjust, because it's a lot.
And you've been doing this for a few more years, but I have to feel that this movie has really elevated you in so many people's eyes. It's a leading role. You're in every scene. How have things changed for you?
Well, I don't know. I feel changed by the experience of it, and I feel changed. It was one of the most extraordinary. It was the most extraordinary experience of my life to make this film with the people that I made it with. Not just an experience as an actor, the most extraordinary, but one of the most extraordinary experiences, full stop, that I've ever had. It was an extraordinary time, and to live with this man and to what he meant to me, it was incredible. So obviously that has an impact, a deep and lasting impact. Not only just as a person, but also, as an actor. And I'm not going to. It's not like a question of trying to match things, but it's just of really just letting it all that sink in and settle and have its place.
Well, I can't wait to see what you guys do next. And again, congratulations on just a beautiful movie from start to finish. Thank you so much.